Conducted an exercise between 7:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Sunday 28th of September 2025. Assisted by personnel of the Freeport Criminal Investigations Department and Warrant Section, based on information received, officers proceeded to a house at Mission Road, Freeport, where they conducted a search. During the search, officers discovered 2 pistols, 3 magazines, and a quantity of assorted ammunition. 5 suspects, 4 men and 1 woman, ages 26 to 41, all of Freeport, were arrested in connection with the finds. Investigations are ongoing. Internationally, U.S. President Donald Trump is once again threatening a 100% tariff on all films produced outside the United States. Trump says foreign countries have stolen America's movie industry, hitting California particularly hard. He argues the levy would protect Hollywood and revive the sector. The president made similar comments in May and is now linking the move to his wider wave of tariffs, which already target pharmaceuticals and imported cabinets. It remains unclear how the film tariff would be applied, whether to the streaming platforms like Netflix or only to cinema releases. Despite his claims, industry data shows the U.S. still generated over $14 billion in film production spending last year, though down from 2022. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Most common presentation are menstrual disturbances, so prolonged and heavy and often very painful periods. So rather than a fairly normal 5-6 day menstrual cycle period, they might get incredibly heavy bleeding for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, and it might be prolonged to 7. This bleeding month on month on month can then lead to a drop in the hemoglobin levels and anemia, which can be very tiring. They can also be very painful. Some women will bleed constantly and not have a cycle at all. They'll bleed for 30 days, 40, 50, 60 days.
WESN.
This is Talking Point, a show that you could argue, depending on your point of view, may miss the point. I would argue that part of what I do is point out where certain public officials miss the point. And in those cases, sometimes I go so far as to borrow a phrase from the movie industry called jumping the shark. That's when the plot of the movie just gets so crazy, you lose the audience. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's not a coherent story. It's not worth following. Now, not saying this is jumping the shark, but before I get into one of the main things that I wanted to highlight this morning in my opening remarks, the missing school teacher has been found. It seems that he was not being held against his will. There are a lot of questions with regards to what's going on. And I wouldn't necessarily want to speculate about what those questions are or mention what those questions are, what some of the rumors and speculations are around his situation that has been in the media so far, which isn't much, but I would assume that those who are following the story now, they may start to speculate beyond, was it a kidnapping? Why was he kidnapped? Why did it seem like he disappeared on his own? One of the things that I will say is that apparently their neighbors or people who know the family, they themselves don't understand the situation. And they have noticed things with regards to, it's a withdrawn group. It actually makes me wonder, did they go to the press or did the press pick up on the story? Because the appearance of it, if the family is not necessarily ready to explain, I hope they didn't go to the press. That's all. If the press went to them, that's different. And they technically never wanted to give a public comment, then fine. But the more and more police are involved, the more and more this would no longer be a private affair. I'm not necessarily ready to say what's going on, to ask directly, but if it's a private affair, keep it private. If there's something wrong and illegal going on, well then, but it's a weird situation. And already we live in a country where at times when crime happens to people who on the surface appear like ordinary people, one of the quickest speculations is to ask, what was they involved in? We don't know, we're not sure, we can't say. And that is a really bad way to live. But I guess in part it's because that's how, we look at our politicians, it trickles down. Speaking of our politicians, of course, there's the whole situation. I don't know how much I want to get into today. The irony is the actual military part of it hasn't really developed to another phase. It's more or less, it is what it is for the last couple of weeks, right? You could say that they have continued with violence, but to say that they've gone to the regime change portion that everyone says, oh, this is all about regime change. I would just like to point out that I don't really know of any significant situation where saber rattling at the border and even pot shots cause a regime change. There was a whole Cuban Missile Crisis. George Bush Sr. encouraged the Kurds to rebel. No regime change. So that's probably going to take an act of Congress, which is not going to happen. But anyway, what I wanted to point out or highlight is some of the interesting things that politicians, both in or from Trinidad at the UN, have said, as well as some of the other regional politicians and the stance that they take. Because I think a lot of people are kind of missing the point. Now, first of all, the Prime Minister is saying, there's no tension in CARICOM. I mean, I guess that's what you say to cover it up. You don't want to admit it. I don't think anybody wants to admit it, right? Because if you admit it, the same people who might be willing to keep things under wraps so that they can keep CARICOM together, once it's out in the public, then it's difficult to keep the perception of CARICOM staying together, and that would make it difficult to actually keep CARICOM together. It's just how politics and international politics by extension works. Perception is that important at times. Otherwise, the situation might devolve and destabilize. Now, Ralph Gonsalves and Mia Mottley, two regional leaders, they are hoping that America will utilize more diplomacy to ease regional tensions. And also, looking at Mia Mottley's comments, she basically, I'm trying to find the phrase, I don't want to misquote her, but she wants to encourage, or why am I missing it now? It's about respecting and managing situations by the rules-based way internationally we have conducted ourselves. There are rules to this. We don't breach the rules. That's nice. My problem with that is it seems as though we somewhat underestimate the fact that rules need to be enforced. I mean, locally, think about it. Look with the school violence, right? We have rules against school violence. Those rules are being disregarded. When our murder rate was at 600 a year, we have laws, not just rules, laws, direct legal authority to say no murder cannot be done. And in 600 plus instances, a couple years in the country's recent memory, that law was disregarded, much as a rule. Rules-based order of the international society is in part based on the willingness of those who can to enforce those rules. And now trying to couch the debate that America is just unwilling to use diplomacy and they are breaching the rules-based order, I think the problem with that is it's very much an oversimplification of what's going on. And it leaves you open for people who disagree with you to start to disregard you, because in their mind, they are thinking along this axis, and you are speaking along some other axis which doesn't exist. Because the reality is, it's not about breaking the rules-based order. There is potentially legal justification of what America has done so far. And then on top of that, the hidden secret of international law is it's not law. A law is when a legislative body of a society decides on something that cannot just be easily ignored or broken, and then there's penalties if you do so. There's the legal authority of the state upon which that legislative assembly legislates for. That's all in the constitution of that state, that these powers are enshrined in that constitution. There's no UN constitution. There's no UN legislative body. The EU does have a legislative body. Everybody had to agree by those terms. And then Britain said, we don't agree anymore, and we're out. And Poland is like, there's things you all do that we're just not doing. Because even with the EU, there's limits. International law is based on treaties. Treaties have to be enforced. One of the people who enforces those treaties is the United States. They are the ones that established the rules-based order of society that now people are saying, well, you're breaking it. Yeah, that's because it's not the same thing as a country's laws. It's not. Everything is by agreement, not by legislative authority. And if you can't enforce, even legislative authority still needs to be enforced, but they have the direct monopoly of their jurisdiction on the use of force. But with international law, that's not the case. No one has a direct monopoly on the use of force. So now, what is legal based on international law? It's not so clear-cut to me. Now, if America does regime change, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And even then, based on international law, a UN resolution is not international law. That's one of the reasons why the whole executable thing is messy at the end of the day. If it was so simple that we could just, as the Caribbean, declare a zone of peace, that's nice. Do you know what is required for peace to exist? People willing to fight for it when necessary. And that is the real issue here. Because the Prime Minister said fight fire with fire. Is that necessary? And I would argue, no, it's not. The debate is not if it's a zone of peace or not. What does that mean? They want to dissuade America from conducting unilateral action. Well, it's not unilateral. The two of the countries neighboring Venezuela, I believe Guyana does, and definitely Trinidad and Tobago's leadership, support this. Because at the base level, do we want help to deal with transnational crime? The answer to that is yes. That can be true alongside but the violence, is it necessary? I'll say this for people that want to be concerned about Palestine. There's a lot more people being killed there in a lot more dubious ways. So I could, to some extent, understand that. But even that situation, all of the declarations in the world, I'm starting to get fed up of world leaders that want to act as though strongly worded letters and public statements are enough. Diplomacy is not going to stop Israel. I've said that before and I'll say it again. This whole negotiate a two-state solution is pitifully naive by world leaders to try to say, oh, well, if we just do this, that's what you've been trying to do for what, a couple of decades now? Both sides are intent to commit violence. One side has a greater capacity of violence and is not concerned in any way about proportionality. They are being far disproportionate, and they don't care. They are just giving us their own Nancy story, right? While they do what they do. It's almost blatant that they're spinning a narrative that is untrue. Because it makes no military sense, what they're doing. Are we supposed to then say, oh, well, let's use diplomacy to deal with that? I'll wait for that to work. If you're really concerned about what's going on with Gaza, it has, you could sanction Israel. Let's just assume America wants to sanction Israel. That's not going to stop what's happening right now. Russia has proven that. The issue is, because we haven't seen regime change, we haven't seen Congress pass an act of war, we haven't seen a general mobilization of large military formations. This is an expensive commitment during peacetime, but in terms of war and invasions, this is nothing. The question is not, oh, are we a zone of peace? The question is, has transnational crime reached the point, because according to Prime Minister Trinidad and Tobago it has, and I am saying I'm not necessarily ready to agree with that as an absolute truth, has transnational crime reached the point that it needs to have measures taken against it on the level of terrorism? And the oversimplified answer to that is maybe. But even if the answer to that is, well, technically yes, it still might not be good enough. Because at the end of the day, yes, they might be interfering with how governments conduct business and utilize violence to intimidate governments. Do we want to classify this as terrorism? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. It might be wrong to not classify it as terrorism. But even with terrorists, there are some terrorists who you capture. You don't have to kill them all. This is not like transnational drug lords are looking to wear suicide vests. Even though it's violence against a government. It's not quite the same. So is it necessary? And again, I would argue, no, it's not. But what I am debating, or what I am saying the issue is not what Prime Minister Mia Mottley or Ralph Gonsalves are saying. They are taking a very simplistic view because emotionally, it's easier to understand. It's easier to just have a clickbait headline or a title, and people will just fall in line because it sounds right. But if you want to accuse America of anything, you can't accuse them necessarily of attacking a state. The people on the boat, are we saying they're all Venezuelans? Is it Venezuelan-owned boats? Are those pirogues registered as Venezuelan-owned boats? Now, if you want to say America is using a certain amount of gray area and taking advantage of it and exploiting it, and we don't like it, yeah, I could agree with that. In fact, and this is what I found interesting. So while I'm thinking the debate and the public narrative is way oversimplified and not really useful, meanwhile, Acting Foreign Affairs Minister Kennedy Swartz, he said, TNT is in no position to determine whether U.S. military strikes against alleged drug vessels leaving Venezuela are legal or not. You see, I agree with that. That's why I said it's one thing to ask America to help us deal with transnational crime. It's another thing to say, fight fire with fire, shoot them, kill them, we don't care. Now, listen, I want to make this point, and this is a high concept point. The problem with people who want to advocate diplomacy, not all, but some, maybe most, is that they think all problems can be solved with diplomacy. Now, does anyone think Hitler could have been solved with diplomacy? Not everybody is going to be reasonable. Diplomacy, right? So we don't need to use violence. There are certain types of criminals where we're not going to use diplomacy. We're going to throw the book at them. If the police try to arrest them and they get killed in the process because they resist an arrest, we're not necessarily going to cry tears over it. I'm talking about the worst of the worst. So now the question is this situation that bad? And I would say that is a precedent that we should set very, very carefully. Make no mistake, back when locally there were calls to use anti-terrorism laws against criminals here, I was against it. When people say, let the army help the police, I am warning against what that means. The US Navy is now technically helping us, but they're doing it in a way that a military would do it, not a police would do it. And now we have a problem. This is why I brought it up. Because I saw what the eventuality could be if taken to the logical extreme. But everyone thinks, oh no, that won't happen. No. While understanding that there will be problems that diplomacy can't solve, I'll never advocate to be quick to jump to that assumption. Because once you go there, it's very hard to walk that back. The precedent of utilizing anti-terrorism laws to go after criminals pushes that further. That's how precedents in a society work. It doesn't stop. It says, oh, this worked, let's go a step further and see what happens. And usually, it won't stop until a disaster happens. Because now, okay, they're doing it for transnational crime. At what point will we start to do it for national levels of crime? At what point will it go too far? And that could apply here as well. Make no mistake. The Prime Minister already said, empty the clip. Stand your ground, empty the clip. The Minister of Defense said, even if they're saying they're cops, if you think they're fake cops, shoot them. Roger Alexander. Our allies will nuke them. A lot of gun talk, a lot of bravado, a lot of aggressive talk, not a lot of responsible talk. Minister Swaratang is saying something responsible. Unfortunately, it isn't necessarily 100% consistent with all of the government messaging. And while I'm not saying we should condemn them for the inconsistency, I am saying you all need to tighten up that ship and think first. I mean, at least I'll say this for the Prime Minister, credit to her. She reined in Philip. And Philip, to some extent, he was ranting, and he wasn't actually on that topic. He just, you need to be careful when you're on a roll, or you think you're on a roll, you don't go too far, because he went too far. But who am I? The sad part is there are certain things I don't want to be proven right. Now, in this case, I'm not really giving an opinion of what I think should happen. I'm just pointing out the fact that the determination on whether the U.S. strikes are legal or not needs more than just a declaration. For a zone of peace to be maintained, it needs more than just a declaration. For certain ills of this world to be stopped, particularly when it's violent ills, it needs more than just a declaration. Now, all right. There was more to say, but we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. I think I'll go into the daily review. I'll save some of my comments more about local politicians. I had bullets to shoot on both sides, for both sides, but don't want to draw it on too much. So, daily review when we come back. Stay tuned.
Every time someone steps into your elevator, they trust it will carry them safely. That's why preventative maintenance matters. It protects lives and shields you from liability. It prevents sudden breakdowns that disrupt business and drain budgets. And it keeps you compliant, so you never have to second-guess safety. With Ardent Solutions, you're not just maintaining elevators, you're protecting people, preserving trust, and keeping your building moving forward.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Feeling drained? Struggling to keep up? It's time to take control of your wellness. On this episode of Wellness Unlocked, we're diving into the key nutrients your body needs for all-day energy and balance. With 100% or more of your daily essential vitamins, plus added chromium to support healthy blood sugar, this is complete wellness in a single soft gel. Join us as we uncover how small changes can make a big impact on your health. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
I want to acknowledge something deeper. The spirit of this organization. the camaraderie, the grit, and the unwavering belief that we are here not just to enforce the law, but to protect the soul of our nation. I am humbled to lead such an organization with such fine officers. And I am reminded daily that leadership is not about command, it is about service. My role is to clear the path so you can work to do your work with confidence, safety, and pride. And if I have done anything right in the last 100 days, it is because I have listened to you, learned from you, and learned from your strength. Let this ceremony be a reminder that every officer matters. Every act of service counts. And every day is an opportunity to build a legacy worthy to wear that badge that we adorn every day. To those who continue to serve with honor, thank you. To those we commend today, congratulations. And to the entire TTBS family, we move together as one.
I was the Commissioner of Police last week, Friday. It was a commendation and promotion ceremony, but it was also, he took that moment to mark his 100 days in office. Now, one of the things that came out just today to kind of show, all right, we're seeing some successes. There was an operation where a drone drop, or I believe it might just be one instance, to try to smuggle contraband into the maximum security prison. It was interdicted. The raid by the police, well, then there was a raid by the police in the facility subsequently. So 7 p.m. Sunday, 6 a.m. Monday, 2 different legs of this operation that netted contraband items, drone equipment, and I believe a couple of people were arrested. So this is interesting because, and this is the part now where curiosity would want me to say, ooh, I wonder how they knew when the drones were coming, because it's not like you're going to have the whole operation just waiting there for weeks on time, you know, dozens of officers just around the prison hoping for someone with a drone to walk up to the prison. They said it was, I believe, 50 meters outside the prison was where they were operating. And this was not just the run-of-the-mill drone setup, as you can see. Operations like this, to pull it off, it suggests a certain degree of expertise, whether they got information beforehand or they had good monitoring systems to respond to an attempted breach. And this is what needs to be done. Because if you, even if the items and the contraband seems to be benign, it's similar to corruption. It is a window that will allow for less benign smuggling and communication channels to be facilitated if you just turn a blind eye at it. So I want to very much appreciate something like this, the manner of which, or the methods that they utilize in order to pull this off. That we don't need to know. But we do need to know, and I very much am happy that they have been able to tell us and reveal to us, hey, we did this thing. And now it's a bit of a warning shot. It's not the same old, same old. It's not business as usual when you want to just walk up to the prison with some drones and some contraband, some weed or cigarettes or whatever, and just expect it to go in. And it then, of course, begs the question, why was it so hard? Because the implication of the statements from the prison service was, well, you know, these drones just come like a thief in the night and we have no way to see them, hear them, detect them, interdict them, and they could go anywhere and they could drop anywhere, and somehow we do not have control of the prison enough that then, you know, the wrong people pick up the stuff that's dropped. And of course, if you have compromised prison officers, then that really is the key. But 100 days in office, let's go back to the commissioner now. This is one success of maybe many successes that we've seen. And how has the 100 days gone? Well, one of the things that was published has been an editorial on Newsday that has a very, I think, a relatively good take on it. Although I may disagree on some of the details, right? But one of the things that they pointed out initially was that when Ayla was asked to grade her first 100 days, what did she say? And I think this is where a lack of awareness was. She wanted to project confidence, I guess. She responded, excellent. But the commissioner, he responded saying, you, the public, are my employer, you tell me. And in a way, it was an even better response to McDonald Jacobs, who didn't want to. But he pointed out, it's not just that I don't want to grade myself, that's inappropriate, but rather, you're the ones that need to grade me. Any man that has to say he is king is no king. Any man that says he's doing a good job or has to insist that he's doing a good job, is he really doing a good job? Let the opinions of others speak to you about who you are. Not you declare it to yourself as though you're trying to spin a yarn. But then, they have a line, you know, they compared his tenure to Ayla's tenure, but when describing his tenure, they say Mr. Guerrero's primary accomplishment in his first few months has been to steady ship. That is true. To what extent he had help with the previous state of emergency, that is debatable, but as a leader, his presence, you could argue, made a big impact. Judy Benjamin wasn't bad, but this was fresh blood that evoked or encouraged us to have a sense of confidence in the leadership. But then I went on to say proactive, not reactive, has been his approach. I don't disagree with that. There are times when he's proactive with his communication, but I do believe for more controversial issues, he's been reactive. And it's not always come across very well, right? The greater degree that he handles public engagement, yes. I can't disagree with that. I can't at all, right? But they say the commissioner's performance has been unimpressive. This is in relation to the probe into Herbert Christopher's arrest, the lack of body cameras, etc., etc. He has been unable to convince the Police Service Commission to act and ineffective in bolstering confidence in operational standards. A contract for new cameras hung in disarray for dubious budgetary reasons. And that was actually, I did want to include it in the previous story. And I was still trying to do that, but it came out today because the Minister of Homeland Security mentioned the fact that the contract was discontinued when he was asked a question. He didn't come forward with it. And then the commissioner, after the fact of that, had to say, and it's in today's papers, that the price of the cameras per unit he believes to be too high. And because of that, they wanted to renegotiate or seek a different supplier. Because he said $8,000 a camera, I believe, is the price that he quoted. Seems to be too much for a camera that's selling elsewhere for $2,500 to $3,000. Now the problem with that is it's not just the camera. It's the whole system, the docking ports, the charging, the hard drives, etc., etc. It's not just the cameras themselves. So I'm hoping that the boss of the TTPS did not just take the whole contract divided by the number of cameras. In fact, I'm gonna. Yeah, it seems like that's what he did, to be honest. The contract is not just for the cameras, it's about all the technology. So I don't know if 8,000 per camera is correct. Now, he may have had technocrats really break it down, right? Or maybe 3,000 per camera includes all the supporting services, right? I don't know what the breakdown is. But the real issue is going back to the editorial, it said that he was proactive, not reactive. Well, listen, if you had a decision to make about body cameras and you didn't figure out a way to proactively communicate your reasoning to us, what's going to happen is the people are going to look at how it unfolded. The minister said it, and it sounded dubious. And I mean, the editorial said it sounded dubious, a dubious reason. And then you have to come out and give the real reason. But now you come in not reacting to a question, but reacting to the answer to a question, reacting to a reaction. It puts you behind the ball on trust and confidence. And I'm not disbelieving the commissioner, but I do find a bad taste in my mouth when he also confirms that they got new body armor. And let's not forget, the Minister of Homeland Security said, oh, well, body armor over body cameras. Well, if you don't want the public to disbelieve you when you say that we had a lawfully just police action led to the deaths of suspects, what am I supposed to say? Because you had an opportunity to try to ensure that you had the equipment to protect the reputation of your officers, but the way, and I'm not saying this is what's happened, but this is how it can be interpreted. This is how it can be seen. You got your way, body armor over body cameras. We don't care about public perception. We don't care about if there's a police shooting, and we're not going to give you the body camera footage anyway, because we're not about that. You just have to trust us at a time when we don't necessarily find you trustworthy. How is that demanding trust, not earning trust, supposed to work? And again, as ASP Arun said yesterday, it's not necessarily the commissioner's fault. He's not going to be able to pay for the sins of everything that was done before. But unfortunately, this is part of the job. When our general manager has to take on the job of running a bad sports franchise, they can't say, oh my gosh, it's unfair. All of my predecessors messed up their drafts, messed up their free agency hires, messed up the contracts with the star players, and now it's not my fault that the place is in a mess. That's true. But if you want to take on the job, that means you are willing, or you imply that you are willing to fix it and to not do the same things that everybody else did. And he's not necessarily as bad, but you're already behind curve. Now, 100 days of results. The commissioner said the TTPS has moved from reacting to crime to outpacing it. Now, with regards to the drone interdiction and the arrests, and I believe they may have gone after a person of interest even beyond the initial arrest of the people outside and the prison action. But yes, in some cases they are outpacing crime. But in other instances, one could argue how much of the reprieve is due to other circumstances. And now part of that reprieve may be, ironically, from the questionable actions by the Americans, because it's upsetting the transnational crime apple cart. There are short-term benefits to that. There could also be short to medium-term consequences to that. And hopefully we will be ready for that. They're saying more firearms were taken off the street. I remember a lot more firearms being published, being taken off the street under Gary Griffith. But that's just me. Detection rates have surged. Okay, that's nice. Although one could argue some of the crime that we have now is not what was the issue before. A lot of the murder rate was being driven by gang violence, reprisal killings, and the like. A lot of the innocent people dying in gang violence were just collateral damage. They were in the wrong place and they got sprayed. And then, of course, there's the prison officers that got killed, the police officers that got shot at or killed. He's saying that the TTPS has a united front. Is it really? Now, there's the whole thing going on with Suzette Martin. And again, the editorial for the Newsday basically pointed out how this is being handled. Not too sure if that's... Although this is where I'll disagree with the editorial again. His August 24th assertion of a greater involvement of Venezuelan criminal elements in TNT society seemed worrying, designed to provide cover for the executive foreign policy embrace of summary executions. Except the national security apparatus of the country has said before the summary executions, as the editorial put it, that Trinidad and Tobago has been operating here and could very well be the reason why the levels of violence in this country increased. Citizens have had mixed views about the commissioner. He doesn't have a magic wand. He will make headway. We have to give him more time. We're heading in the right direction. That's a iffy thing, huh? How much time do you want to give someone whose job is to prevent things like murders? He's way better than Erla. Can't disagree with that, objectively speaking. I don't have any available argument to disagree with that, so I can't provide any sort of logic or reasoning there. But then I guess some people have this issue. Absolutely nothing has changed. These critical positions should be apolitical and assigned to the individual with the highest and strongest qualifications. I do not feel safe before him nor after. I think it's because at the end of the day, and this is my belief, I could be wrong, but I think this is the case. The commissioner can only do so much to fix things when you have problems with the legislature. If stand your ground is the solution, that was the main campaign cry on crime, right? We have not really heard any sort of government level strategy on how they're going to fix the police service. And the commissioner, well, he's stuck with his executive. So what else is he going to say except that it's a united front? Unless he has some smoking gun to say one of them broke the law, he's stuck with them. And that's the other problem. He is forced to play politics just because of how the internal office politics of the police service has been conducted over the last, I don't know how many years, and will continue to be conducted because meritocracy is not the first go-to thing. And the Police Service Commission being woefully silent and inconsistent, it's not a good sign. Because it's not just the commissioner that needs to be able to be proactive, especially with communication. It's the minister, and to some extent, it's the Service Commission. Especially when you just saw the Service Commission and the system essentially around which it is dependent or is dependent on it. Basically, it collapsed. It failed. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that. All right. I want to go on to the next topic. And again, we'll go on with the body camera situation. I know what the commissioner said. I'm not 100% willing to accept that at face value as the be-all and end-all. Because, and this is interesting, it was supposed to be the Minister of Homeland Security responded to the contract for 3,000 body cameras. It was supposed to be a contract for 5,000 body cameras, I believe. That's what Vishnu Dan Paul asked the question, and I believe that's the correct question. But Alexander said, no, they tendered a contract for 3,000 cameras. Oh, because let's not solve the problem. Let's put a price on law enforcement and human lives. And I'm not saying, obviously, yes, don't spend exorbitantly. Buy 16 helicopters and 15 armored cars. You know, we don't need all of that. We don't need a police station on every street corner. But one would think things like body cameras and body armor, you know, there's a point where you can't not buy it. You need to have enough to facilitate the police service to function at a certain level of professional responsibility. And dare I say, they say they scrapped it because the per unit cost was too expensive. I wonder if and that's the other thing, is the $3,000 cost, is that the old time price for cameras? Like, I haven't looked, somebody who did look into it actually did, and it could have been for 5,000, I'm not sure if it was for 3,000, looked at the price and didn't see anything wrong with the price when you factor in the fact that it's more than just wearing cameras. It's all the other things you need to make the cameras work. But when you look broader, and this is the thing, so the commissioner comes with this explanation to try to explain the minister's statements and says, no, well, the per unit price didn't like it, we want to get a better deal. First of all, and I understand that procurement is not always going to be a fast and effective thing. But this is not the thing I think people want to see. Oh, let's take our time. Yes, you have to be responsible, but you have to be responsible while showing a sense of urgency to get this done sooner rather than later, not taking your time. And I'm not saying he is taking his time, but he's opened up himself and whoever else is involved and responsible for this to be accused of such. Because people wanted these things yesterday, and it looks like we ain't getting them anytime soon because we're open to see who else wants to tender. And heaven help you if the follow-up proposals are not that much cheaper. Because when you look at the wider picture of the economy, when you look at what's going on with the S&P rating and how the government's expenditure has been going, it seems like this government is trying to pinch pennies until they get to the budget. Now, Vassan Brandt has come out and said that the S&P's latest ratings is a sobering insight into the country's economic standings. Let's not forget, he rejoined the UNC for a day, it seems, right? I don't remember hearing from him anytime after that. And he's had his differences with Kamala, but at least this is not a PNM guy talking, okay? To what extent do you think he's objective? I leave that up to you. The outlook from stable to negative is because the country's fiscal and external buffers have eroded gradually over many years. Now, to some extent, that is speaking about an issue that the government mostly, if not completely, inherited. We're creditworthy, but they estimates there's now a 1 in 3 chance of a downgrade within the next 2 years. This move would raise borrowing costs, strain reserves, restrict government ability to sustain social programs. I'm sorry. Rich countries with social programs, which usually is wasteful because they are not implemented properly and they are not done carefully enough. Not that social programs in and of themselves is a wrong thing. It's just that social programs are not necessarily done responsibly. And the motivations behind them ends up being really for other reasons like dependency. You won't vote against me if you're dependent on me, would you? Unfortunately, assets alone are not enough. We have the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, central bank reserves, etc., etc. He said markets are looking for proof the state can use its resources wisely and consistently. And I'll be honest, And the S&P rating has been slowly descending, year after year. I think the last 2 years it stayed at BBB minus, but stable. But we've been slowly, we were higher than BBB plus at one point, if my memory stays correct. In the short term, we must demonstrate discipline, transparency, and independent oversight. That last part is kind of harder in the short term, if I'm being honest. I want to see more independent oversight, but when the people appointing the independent people is appointed by the government, at what point is it really independent? Let's not try to fool ourselves here. And I've had this thought since the PNM, and it doesn't change just because it's the UNC. Because I'm speaking about the system, not about the people involved. For those that might miss that level of subtlety. But discipline and transparency, I don't know if you could argue that we have that. The next 6 months should be dedicated to stabilizing markets and proving that any fiscal plan is time-bound, transparent, and measurable. I don't know what he means by time-bound, except we have a plan and we're going to stick to the plan. The next budget should be presented as a fiscal stabilization plan with clear revenue and expenditure targets, particularly in the non-energy sector. Now, here's the thing. I honestly think that the former budgets under the PNM administration, their goal was stability. And I fear we might be beyond the point where we could just keep things stable and figure out a way out from there. And I don't necessarily mean that we need to destroy the economy. But how we prioritize things now might not be just, oh, well, we need to keep things stable. Because keeping things stable means not changing expenditure. That might be an oversimplification. But to me, that's what it means. Maintaining the status quo, that's the easiest, most straightforward way to keep things stable. If you want to change what you're spending money on, you risk instability. Because, as we could see, I think the trickle-down effect of getting rid of the CPEP contracts, regardless of ghost gangs or not, there's still a trickle-down effect that I believe the government did not account for. And we're feeling that, because there's less money circulating. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Poor people will circulate a lot of their money and will disproportionately help drive the economy in ways we underestimate. Non-essential projects should be frozen for half a year, and this is where you run the risk of destabilizing things, because the people who were dependent on non-essential projects money now will not have that money. But I don't have an issue with this. I just have an issue with his framing, because I think he's not necessarily being efficient. He's not necessarily going down one direction. He's kind of trying to go down two. Now, so many things he's calling for, and a lot of things he's calling for: debt management strategy, and the HFF not being treated as a easy go-to bank to withdraw money to deal with our problems. You know, that's all well and good. But really and truly, I think at some point we need a good handle on what is the vision and how are we going to execute it, and that comes down to the minute details of what are we going to prioritize? What are the types of projects and the priority projects to drive whatever it is we need to change and to get us to survive through until things improve. And that's where the government needs to not just be transparent, oh, they say they're going to do a thing. No, but to show us a plan, a strategy, not just a list of things that we're going to do. Because that's what the last budget was. It was a list of things. Well, we're going to sell these things, and we're going to spend this money, budget. And on some level, yes, that's what a budget is. Right? You just tell us the amounts, what you're spending it on, that is a budget, right? But the making of the budget needs a plan. And the presentation of the budget is an opportunity for the government to present their plan. We didn't get a plan because the previous guys seemingly, and if they had a plan, I apologize, but you need to do a better job of communicating your plan. So seemingly, you had no plan. If the current administration does the same thing, I'll say the same thing about them. Oh gosh, something just closed there. Now, I'll jump straight to what Marvin Gonzalez had to say, that he has little hope it will include any meaningful job creation initiatives. I hate to say this, but I think that's not totally unreasonable a thing to say. Not because I have so little faith in the government, rather, it's primarily because I do think it's going to be a challenge. And to face that challenge, I don't have a lot of faith in some of the people in government. Not necessarily all. I have to actually see how they will handle things. But he accused the government of lacking a coherent employment strategy and pursuing policies that have led to mass job losses. And I would argue, I might not necessarily agree with how he put it, but I would argue that's the result of what we got. We saw political decisions made up front that seemingly did not have any real consideration for an employment strategy for the nation. Because then you would take into account, okay, well, if these people no longer have an income, what does that mean? How does that trickle down? How do we compensate for that? Do we need to compensate for that? Maybe we don't need to compensate for that. Maybe we would like to, but we can't. But what can we do? It's very complex. Even just the CPAP ERP thing alone is very complex, right? So I'm not here to say, oh my gosh, it would have been so easy if you just push this one button, it wouldn't have been that bad. No, I'm not going to say that. But the observation of MP Gonzalez, I think, is not entirely wrong. The government has not announced any major policy that could reasonably be interpreted as promoting employment generation. True, I would argue that they are waiting on their budget, but the problem is they're not necessarily telling us the plan is we'll try and hold strain, and then when the new budget comes on, we'll have more flexibility to do things. They're not necessarily explaining that to us very well. Since taking off, it has only engaged in mass firings across 6 sectors, dismantling programs designed to assist the most vulnerable. It is kind of ironic, the unemployment relief program, people who were employed by that for unemployment relief are now unemployed. That's a hell of an optic to allow. Yes, I'm not going to say they're not ghost gangs, but still, proactive leadership would eliminate that narrative while still doing what you did. Proactive communication. Having a sense of awareness on the requirements of the job, which once they got into the job, certain aspects, I think, got away from them. Not necessarily any worse than what the PNM has done, but the government appears devoid of ideas and seems shocked that it is actually empowered. Feels like they're making it up as they go along. I'm not expecting any major announcements in the budget that will give us hope. The population should instead brace for distraction tactics. Unfortunately, I can't say that that can't happen. I'm not hoping it happens. I don't believe it's guaranteed to happen. I don't think it's likely to happen, but it can very well happen. More importantly, when Marvin Gonzalez says that it feels as though they're devoid of ideas and shocked that they're empowered and they're making up as they go along. When the Prime Minister, and I'll say this, but while this is on one hand a vote of support for the Prime Minister, it also technically is in line with what Marvin Gonzalez is saying. When they had their first post-cabinet press briefing and they were outlining some of the economic challenges that they discovered, now that they saw how the sausage was made behind the curtain with regards to our economy, on the government side, you could see real emotion in the Prime Minister. Real emotion. Fear, uncertainty, sadness. Now, financially, she should be fine, but the country as a whole, things are going to be rough. Cynics could say, oh, well, she was upset because they don't have much money to steal. No, I don't think that's what it was. Because you could, a lot of times, it's the body language and the tone and the message and the delivery, it reveals things. And when politicians, when they have weird tones that seem out of place, that reveals things. But she was very much You could hear the concern in her voice. But the problem is, back to Marvin Gonzalez's point, from that moment, we go on now where we're not really hearing much about these things anymore. We keep getting promises of we'll find the money, but more and more there are things of, well, we'll find the money, but we don't have money for that. We'll find the money, but we don't have money for that. We'll find the money, but we have to cut sponsorship here. We'll find the money, but we have to cut this there. And then when you throw it on top, and Karen will go into this tomorrow because she's very alarmed by it, when you throw on top the what gets cut and what didn't get cut, who got fired and who didn't get fired and who got hired, and not having the ability to proactively communicate the intentions and why it's okay and the justifications and the reasoning. No, we don't need to explain ourselves to you. We're the politicians. You're the peasants. That's how it comes across. So people are going to speculate negatively. And they keep saying, we'll find the money, we'll find the money, we'll find the money. But, hey, that property tax refund, nah, we can't afford that. Those body cameras, you can't afford that. We'll find the money. And then it goes back to the question of, do you even know what you're saying when you're promising people something that you might not be able to actually deliver on because, unfortunately, as the old saying goes, money doesn't grow on trees. And TNT does not have a fairy godmother or a rich uncle who's going to pass away all of a sudden and leave us an inheritance. Technically speaking, on terms of the analogy for countries, that already happened. And we squandered it for the most part. There are a couple of other economists that have also, Mariana Brown is warning about credit rating risk. And this is someone who, again, is not necessarily on the in with the previous administration, right? Judging from the evidence of the last 6 months, it is unlikely that meaningful change will take place in 6 to 24 months. That's a fair assessment to make. That's part of the problem. It's not about the government now being incapable. It's about the fact that the challenge, the task, the mountain in front of you is that tall. At the end of the day, no one is going to just scale Everest in half the time as everyone else. So we have this issue, and Maria Brown is saying, well, 6 to 24 months, we might really see much, because that's how long it might take to try to lay the groundwork to really see results in the long term, to see something stable happen, not some short-term, unstable plaster. And then, of course, one of the things with regards to our economic goals, and it always comes back to this, because Dr. Pope Tirari was saying, you know, he said, we can't afford a populist budget. And that's just a nicer way of saying we can't afford a whole set of social programs that money goes out, but we don't necessarily see benefits to society in proportion to the money that goes out. Yes, certain programs like senior citizen grants and pension and stuff like that, we can't just turn that off right now. We can't. We could modify it for the future, but that's something you have to do carefully and slowly, because the people who are in the system, not just receiving their pension now, but are soon to receive their pension, they can't adjust the changes. They're stuck, they're locked in. So there's a responsibility to not pull the rug out from under them just for the sake of change. Just because, well, we have to, so you have to feel it. No, you could do it slowly so that you phase the changes, so that people could slowly make adjustments. Those that have a more reasonable time frame to make adjustments, they could hopefully do so. Right? It's time to choose where waste, corruption, and policy drift can no longer be tolerated. And that one in the middle there, corruption. See, waste is bad enough. And one could argue, a lot of waste. But governments, hard time doing things efficiently. You're going to get waste. All right. But corruption is intentional. Now what's going to happen is, you're going to get the PNN people saying, well, we could have fixed things because it's UNC corruption. And then you have the UNC going to say, no, we are going to fix things because the reason why we're in this mess is the PNM corruption. And I'm going to say, there is far too much corruption no matter who's in government. Because no one wants to do things like initiate campaign finance reform, initiate meaningful constitutional reform. What about the Office of the Procurement Regulator? The last two administrations, the one before the Keith Rowley was the People's Partnership, seemingly didn't care to initiate the Procurement Regulator and Procurement Regulations Office properly. They just saddled the Keith Rowley administration with a procurement regulator they selected, and I don't think they finished the job, and then the Keith Rowley administration is like, well, we're not really going to bother with this either. And that tells me neither side cared about procurement regulation, except when they're in opposition to lambast the government. Just wait. Just wait. It's going to come. And it will come regardless of who's in opposition. So, I'll leave that there. There's more about the property tax thing I can get into, but I've been going on enough. We'll open up the phone lines. If we don't have a call right now, I do want to take a break. We do have a call. We have a call? Diego Martin, of course, on the line. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. A couple of things. You highlighted corruption, and you have to understand, it has, they say this is PNM country, and PNM has to take a lot of blame for that. Their past deeds. I've said that the talking tongue is that Julian John had work ethics of Jack Warner, and the analogy, she's a clone. I am saying the 13 of them are clone, and more of them are clone of Johnny O'Halloran. That is where it started, because everything to do is based on a 10%. Let's face it, the net result of where we are now is the collective mismanagement for a political party has ruled the country for 77% of the time. Let me get back to current affairs now. You see that issue with the breakfast shed?
Oh, yeah, I heard about it.
Let's look at it. The owing. We have to dig deeper to see if those were bona fide people who they rented to, or if it is like these CPEP contractors who were no registered company, or if they are each of those shed owners, if they are part of a larger franchise and they have several things. But to allow millions of dollars just frittered away is like the agency not collecting rent, and they're leaving people to fester, and they're leaving people to... My thing, this is easy to do. Put it back out to tenders. Make sure you have bona fide people who want to look at these little breakfast shed and to provide things. And there we go. So it's an easy solution. The other thing is property tax, and I'm offering free advice to Tanku. You see all that property tax that I paid and several other people, and half of the country and paid. I am glad that they have said, okay, they're going to revise the property tax, but what I have paid, what he should do, don't give no refunds, because the country is under some serious pressure. Let them put it towards future land and building tax, etc. As a credit to that. So everybody going to be happy. I going to know I have something down the road, and we could move on. I was really, really happy to see the Prime Minister giving a press conference on the train going back from New York to D.C. Her disposition was one of humility, not grandeur, not arrogance. And what actions speak louder than words, you know. She can't afford to take a private jet with the ministers and to fly as what Patrick Manning wanted to do by the executive jet, and what KCR and the PLM want to do when Rav Gonzalez and himself were not allowed any special treatment on American Airlines in Guyana. So that tells me she understood the limitations in terms of expensive. She didn't budget for this. They budget $50 million for Rowley, for the Prime Minister, for entertainment, etc. She probably isn't part of that. My big issue now is the judgment against Stuart Young, the government, and the Chief Medical Officer. One of the pieces, I had a quick review of it, and one of the judges said it was tantamount to slavery and indentured servitude. That is skating on the governance of the previous government, the governance. I am looking at my wallet, and I don't have no money to pay for tax. All of those poor management of the country, poor governance, causing us a lot of money. I mean to say, there was a Minister of Health who said we are number one, and he was crying for tears. You understand what kind of number one we are?
Well, I would just like to say this. What the Minister of Health did and what National Security did, those are two different things.
But they were all collectively responsible for it. He was there every morning on a press conference.
Yes, but I would argue, I mean, those are two different, they're two different things. You can't directly attribute it and put them to say they're the same. You could say that, yes, they're part of covenant.
I'm not saying the same.
Right.
I'm saying it's collective responsibility. He could have whispered to them and said, look, why are you doing that? We will manage it here. Allow the people. That is what they say. They allow. You remember there's an allegation. Listen to this. There was an allegation of a Minister of Transport, allowed allegation. I don't know if it's true. His daughter and his doctor come in at the expense of citizens of the country. And I'm going to mention the last point. There's an allegation. NCRHA owing $322 million. And what I'm being told and what I'm hearing, one of the persons who has a contract for consumable, mass, etc., and etc., is the wife of the man who was crying. Was that an issue why they didn't have consumables during the COVID? I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Here's the thing. Again, it wasn't up to Terence Dale saying on the immigration policy. Right? Yes, he could be part of the discussions, but it's really not up to him. Now, you're right in the fact that he could have said, hey, don't do that. I have a way to deal with it. Let me try. I don't know if he said it or not. I don't. But I don't care to lump him into that in that sense. And to lump the health system and more importantly, because Terence Dale saying as part of cabinet, he is still part of cabinet. He still bears some of that responsibility, right? Even if he didn't make the decision, he didn't speak out against it. Or he didn't speak out against it enough. And you could argue, well, united front and we can't break ranks and whatever. Well, this might be one of those things where maybe you should have spoken up a bit more. But I don't necessarily want to go into the nitty-gritties of that with him. I think there's enough direct blame to go around with the people who are directly responsible for the closing of the borders in such a poor fashion. But more importantly, the Ministry of Health had absolutely nothing to do with that decision. You think they're going to care what those doctors thought with regards to who should come in or who shouldn't come in? No. Because initially it made sense, right? Suspend travel in the short term because we don't know. That's the problem with COVID that people seem to forget. They want to act as though when it happened in March and February, we knew what we know now. We didn't know then. But the key point is that doesn't mean the nonsense was not what they did. The nonsense was what they kept doing for too long when we started to have a better understanding of what this was. Back in December, January 2019 to 2020, you had doctors in Italy basically just saying, never seen anything like this, don't know what to do, don't understand, because they were literally the first. And even when COVID started here, similar things were happening around the world. We didn't know. So the initial, okay, let's suspend travel because we don't know. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation we can't manage. But maybe after a couple of months, more importantly, it was how the exemptions to come back home were seemingly handled inconsistently and unfairly. That was the issue, more than anything else. But I would argue that after a couple of months, depending on what you see with regards to the risk of international travel, you could have maybe started to put things in place for every one of our nationals to come home. We didn't have that. Claxton, be on the line. I might have more to say about this, but we'll take a call. Call, good morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Yeah, morning, Sean. Yeah. Yeah, Sean, morning.
Mute the TV, caller.
I
Mute
like
the
how
TV.
you allow that guy to know, hey, yeah, I like how you allow the man to know, hey, nobody didn't know what was going on. You understand? And this is the kind of facts we must have to tell people. Something happened like that pandemic. Nobody didn't know. When you watch on the TV, you see the whole world was shut down. Nobody didn't know. And you don't know if somebody coming in will bring a plague to kill everybody. But you see, when you have distorted people who only see one way, they could only just see a narrative. They don't see nothing else, you know. They don't have nothing about country to understand. Hey, the government at the day they had to do what they had to do to save life because they don't know, right? And he is here today to talk all that kind of talk, all because of what the government do. But they don't have no thankfulness. They are so deceitful. Everything the government do, they're wrong. Now he is asking that the government not give back property tax money, but to use it and to maybe also bring back property tax, because that is a way for the government to get revenue. Now, because of all these things happening, I can't get my little pension that I just use. You understand? I had to starve for my little pension because they say the machine mash up or the machine this or some kind of thing. They don't know if after a time you're going to get national insurance, because they say after 8 years that program will be crashed, because you know why? All the loopholes that they had where people wasn't paying. You understand? People in this country feel that the government owe them something, so don't pay nothing. But throughout the world, you're paying national, you have to pay all these property tax and different things so that revenue could come back to the country so that they could do certain things. But all you need, Sean, all you need to educate the population on what is really happening, the truth and the facts. Because this is a serious time, you know. We can no longer deal with no gobbledygook talk and propaganda. That ain't making sense. And the more we could open up some people's head who always believe that the wrong way thinking is the right way, it would be good for everybody so we could benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Now, some people might say, why I didn't interrupt the caller? It's because seemingly at times there's a delay. It's better to let the caller just talk. I don't know. I don't want to, as how it starts off. But I'll actually say this is the reverse to the previous call. We didn't know, but note what I said at the end. How long was it going on? First of all, the locking our own people out while illegal immigration was happening at the same time. Because after Carnival, we didn't have spikes in COVID because of Carnival, as far as I remember. And then we had a spike, and there were some people that said, oh, it might be the illegals. And people didn't want to think that way because that seems wrong. But at the end of the day, it was a fact. While people were still locked out of the country, we had spikes in COVID that came from Latin America, right? Now, there's a chance that it didn't come directly from Latin America. It might have gone up to Miami and come back down. I don't know. But I have yet to hear anyone reasonably say that the borders, the maritime borders, were secure during COVID. I've yet to hear any claims of that. We got that in the moment, and seemingly they didn't really want to say it any further because they probably knew we don't have a way to prove this to be true or substantiate these claims. So we had porous borders while people were locked out. And then we had people that were granted exemptions to come home. And the allegation is, I don't know if the court said this, it could have been the lawyer for the plaintiffs, that rich people, financiers, important members of society, they got through with their exemptions easy, and people without the means to survive outside of our borders, that weren't prepared to financially survive outside of our borders, they were stuck outside. When the reverse is what should have happened. Those without means should have probably had the first crack of coming home. You're out there, you don't have the means to take care of yourself. I think in some cases there might have been university students or young people just taking trips on vacation. They were caught not realizing the situation. I'm not speaking about those idiots that but they were advised by the government not to travel, and they travel anyway because they wanted to go on vacation, while people dying in bunches at a time in Italy and India and what have you, right? They were people that they got the advice. It was an international situation already, and they still went on their cruise. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the ones that were legitimately stuck out there because they were there while this happened, and they didn't have the means to afford to stay out there while this happened. Not everybody could just magically afford that. People were giving away food and lodging for free because everybody was under strain. So we didn't know, but it went on for too long and it was not managed properly. That I don't think we could argue. We have a call on the line. Sorry. Caller, you're on the air.
Right. Good morning, Sean Michael Small. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Right. Calling from Trinity. How are you this morning?
Well.
All right. So let's get to a couple points. Well, with regard to the last caller, who spoke about you made an observation and you explained it to the caller in San Fernando with regard to COVID, where we have to have a period of observation, and then we have to have a period of analysis and make decisions. And you were quite right in saying that, that in terms of bringing back people, it was done unfairly. And that's a fair analysis in terms of how you explained it. And I think the caller from San Fernando understood that. I understand that. So the caller the guy who called after to talk about the ungratefulness of people's analysis, doesn't right that I respect his contribution and I respect his right to contribute, but it does not rise to the level of critical thought. Setting that aside, let's look at the foreign policy issues of Trinidad and Tobago and of the region, right? Specifically our relationship with Venezuela and what's going on in the region. And I understood your narrative with regard to whether we are a region of peace. And what that brings and how we can achieve being a region of peace. So let's take it one step at a time. Venezuela. Venezuela is not an exporter of drugs to the U.S. All right? So there may be Venezuelan gangs, or there may be, like everywhere else all over the world, people who run in drugs within the region. What the drug running does to us is devastate us and devastate us locally in terms of who deals with drugs in Trinidad. The 90% of the drugs that are exported to the largest drug market, which is the United States, comes through the Pacific coast, not through our region. We are a transshipment center for various drug activity, yes, for fuel and for guns and so on, right? But that has moved, the needle has moved over to the Pacific side, and that is where drugs are entering the United States, which is the largest drug market in the world, where the demand is high. So, the issue with Venezuela and the United States was never about drugs. It's not about drugs. It's about the people's resources. The Venezuelan people's resources and their oil reserves. That is the U.S. narrative on that. Trump don't understand that. The guys who pull in Trump's strings understand that. The narrative is about their resources, right? And they use drugs as an excuse invade Venezuela or try or threaten to invade Venezuela, right? And I've said it before on your show, when Mrs. Nunez Teixeira was there on a previous occasion. The United States government infiltrated the minority communities with drugs. So the United States government not necessarily hell-bent on solving the drug problem, right? So the FBI, that is what they use drugs to infiltrate countries, they use drugs to infiltrate minority communities, and those are facts. So that is par for the course. We in Trinidad and in this region have to be educated towards that. We are former colonial people. We have to know how our former colonial masters and the imperial empires operate. So that is par for the course, right? They murder people, they infiltrate the country with drugs, they assassinate leaders, and that is a normal day in the life of the CIA and an FBI agent. Moving along, we have to ensure that we have the hardware and the goods and the tools to protect our borders, right? We have to protect our borders. I would be very wary to recruit the United States in helping us solve our drug problem. Failure. The last government failed to keep our hardware and our assets maintained so we can protect our borders. That is a straight line. That is a straight line to stupidity. They failed. We have to pick up that slack. So at this point in time, so what this government has to do is to turn those failures into successes, thereby allowing yourself to become less dependent on the United States to come and infiltrate the region. They would help you with your drugs, they bombing boats out to the water and all that, right? But you don't want to hit your wagon to them guys, because them guys really and truly are really straight up when it comes to solving the drug problem. We all travel to the United States. We all have our visas, but we all know which lane to walk on and which lane to drive on when we are visiting family in the U.S. But we have to do that with the full knowledge of them fellas really not interested in our welfare, the welfare of developing countries. They're interested in the resources. Enough said. Have a good day, Sean, and keep fighting the good fight. Take care.
Thank you, caller. The one thing, though, the problem with that narrative is, on a practical level, what has been deployed is not enough for regime change. Now, you could attempt it with what has been deployed. And people might think, oh, it's a whole nuclear-powered attack submarine and multiple ships. What has been deployed is not enough for regime change. You could make the attempt, but even Dr. Ellis, I believe, would, USAMI War College, Latin American Studies, very pro-American. From what I gathered from his contribution on AM Prime a couple of weeks ago, he was not enthused by that possibility at all. At all, right? To say regime change and you pluck Maduro out, because that's more or less what you're going to do. You can take out some key targets, but you're not going to actually go into the country and change the country with 1,000 to 2,000 boots on the ground. Not even all of them are riflemen. Technically, all Marines are riflemen, but all the ships in the world is not going to secure ground for you, right? And regime change can be very messy. And the thing is, some people think, oh, well, they're intimidating Maduro to encourage people to. History has shown within Venezuela, and that's one of the things Dr. Ellis was pointing out, but it has shown within Venezuela, and even the last election, when it seems as though the population voted for the opposition based on how the results were being reported, and then how the victory of Maduro was being reported, and the lack of documentation for that, there will be no popular uprising in Venezuela. There will be no, oh my gosh, maybe this is a sinking ship, let's abandon Maduro. No. Those who are dependent on dictators, generally speaking, will not give up on their dictator who provides them with all of the creature comforts that they want, and they depend on them. He pays for them, right? There was the Republican Guard in Iraq. It's the military in Venezuela. They're there to protect him from the peasants, not from America. All that is window dressing. You want to have an analysis on America and where, they are misleading us. Let's not forget, Venezuelans' government is not, what's the word? Reliable narrator. And the military that is there to protect him and dependent on him because he gives them preferential treatment, he gives them the money, he gives them the perks. They're not going to abandon that just so, because they've already probably, a lot of them has done enough bad things during the years that if there is a regime change, a lot of their gooses are going to be cooked. Look at what happened to the Nazis when eventually Germany was defeated. It didn't just end with Hitler, and then everyone was like, nothing to see here, everybody else just go home. No, all of these subordinates under him, down to the guards of Satan concentration camps. Not just the heads of the camps, but the guards. Everybody got taken to task at the atrocities, whether war crimes or genocide or whatever. So there will be a lot of people, and I believe this is one of the things Dr. Ellis was talking about. There's a lot of people who, even if it's for their own skin, they're not necessarily prepared to see Venezuela change. So it's going to take more than a couple thousand Marines. And we're talking something like 12 armored vehicles and a wing of fighters. That's not a lot. Not for a country of 20 to 30 million. I can't remember what the population is. So they could attempt it. That could end really badly. So until I actually see more, I'm not willing to just assume it's for regime change. I understand when you analyze history and what you believe the motivation to be, that is the conclusion. But there's practical reality. So, because meanwhile, with all of the cynical analysis of international politics, we still have people that are like, give peace a chance. Diplomacy, diplomacy. Because by that train of thought, do you really expect America to engage diplomatically with Venezuela? Over what? Because ironically, Venezuela doesn't sell drugs to the United States. Are we saying that those boats of Venezuela, now granted they may not be drug smuggling boats. We don't know. That's part of the problem. But they're not technically attacking the state of Venezuela. Although I hope that they're doing it in international waters, but based on reports, they're not. So that's a different set of national sovereignty laws that they're potentially breaking. And in fact, that might be more clear-cut than the bombing of the pirogues. We have San Fernando on the line. There's also a comment to get to before we'll wrap up the show. San Fernando, good morning.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
I just want to comment on Mr. Guevara's statement about the body cameras and the cost.
Mm-hmm.
I would caution him to, be very careful. I know they may have an issue with funding for the body cameras.
Mm-hmm.
However, in body camera systems and professional law enforcement body camera systems, the cost is in line. That $8,000 is in line with with a system that is robust, having the proper software, having the proper storage capacities and stuff. That is in line, because in addition to normally you would see a proper system, a robust system cost around $6,000. When you work it out, about $6,000 per camera for the size of our force. However, you have to look at, and that is just the wholesale price. You have to look at taxes. You have to look at freight. You have to look at and whoever is bringing it, you have to make a profit.
Also, I don't know if that could also include infrastructure deficiencies to actually install the system.
That's right, as well. So and the price that he gave, that you could get it for $2,500 and $3,000. That is just the camera.
Right.
That is just a robust camera.
Right.
With nothing else with it. So I really want to be in Mr. Guevara's corner, but I would like him to just be a little more cautious and stop going on the following Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander is a politician. He's a police officer. I don't have to say have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. And this is the thing. So, thank you for that. we better not hear that the bill was not what you made it out to be. The implications are that either the decision was made based on short-sighted and bad analysis, or but we could get it cheaper. Is it really cheaper? Or are you just not realizing what it is you're paying for in A versus B is not exactly the same thing. You're comparing not even apples to oranges, you're comparing apples to watermelons or apples to chicken drumsticks. You're comparing a whole system versus part of a system. Was it bad analysis? Assuming that to be true, because I don't know for sure, but according to Mr. Sanfan, I know when you analyze the prices of these things, that's what it seems like. So let's assume that to be true. Is it bad analysis that made a bad decision? Oh, why is it so expensive? We could do better. Blah, 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 blah. Never underestimate the capacity for people to think that they're smarter than everybody else. Even if they don't actually think that, subconsciously that could be part of the thing. But we could do it better than that, man. But there's also a different scenario, that it was a political decision, and here comes the commissioner trying to run cover with a badly thought out explanation. Because that's the problem. Because he is responding to the minister's response to a question, it comes across as an excuse and not a reason. If you were proactive up front, it would be easier to accept. And one of the other things about being proactive up front allows is, this is what we intend to do. And then someone who has a different perspective might notice a problem with that plan and say, hey, but this might not work. And then you could say, oh, you might be right, let's change the plan. Unless, of course, it was a predetermined outcome, in which case you don't want to hear anyone come up with inconvenient things like logic and reasoning. And now and that's the thing, I might sound cynical to the commissioner, but he has opened himself up to that with how he has communicated on this issue, about this issue. He's opened himself up to that. Let's take the comment, because I think this kind of goes in line. Morning, Sean, you said, come across a PNM apologist in your acidic comments about the present government. I've been around since PM Eric Williams, working in Port of Spain, and the corruption then had no boundaries. What I have said in no way exonerates the PNM. And I have thrown in lines here and there about what went wrong during their time. A comment from a CARICOM PM that a then TNT government, where we spent money like a dose of salt, be guided on our history. I'm not entirely sure what the point. If you want to do a follow-up, either we'll read it today or tomorrow. I don't know what's the last point you were trying to make, to be honest. But I'll say this. I think we need to stop thinking about, well, someone is right here. That means they're right everywhere. It's not too dissimilar to what I said. Just because I might approve of something you have done, or I might be open, depending on what it is, to agree with anything, or seemingly will agree with anything, even then does not mean that I agree with everything. And usually I might agree with something, and then I might disagree with something else. It's not about I am loyal to a side, or one side must be right, and that's the problem. Part of the mentality, it's basic human psychology, to fall into the trap of, well, I agree with him on this, so if I disagree with him on that, it means I was initially wrong. No. Human beings are complex. Your sports heroes are your sports heroes and could be great men while doing dastardly things. And in a lot of cases, look, this might be very controversial. Bill Cosby said a lot of good things that was needed to hear. The problem is he was a bad man. And in his case, the good doesn't outweigh the bad. The good doesn't erase the bad. Now, the bad doesn't erase the good, but the bad is bad enough that he had to face consequences for that bad. No one's going to appreciate that bad. What he said that was potentially positive is not now somehow untrue. It's just that we don't necessarily want to hear from him anymore because he's done some things that are so heinous, they are practically unforgivable. And whatever consequences he faces, he faces. But if someone else Because some of the things he said were not that specific, right? If someone else comes with those messages, are we going to just disregard it? Will Smith slap Chris Rock. Is all of a sudden everything Will Smith says to be disregarded? There were things that Dr. Keith Rowley did that I agreed with. And I've criticized Dr. Keith Rowley a lot over the years, including still. Because the things I agree with, I agree with. The things I disagree with, I disagree with. I will have reasoning for both. Not just because he's PNM, not just because of his race or his height or how he conducts himself will I agree with everything he says or disagree. It will be based on the merits of the individual case. The initial response to COVID, I agree with. It went on too long. It was not managed properly. At times, it was managed unfairly and unethically. But the initial response was as good as you could get. And I'll say that till the cows come home. I was proud of my government in those early days. And that's why, and this is the thing. Because a lot of people would just want to criticize Stuart Young. I'll say, no. There was a time. I was there at one of the first press conferences about COVID. And he was there. The Prime Minister was there. He was there. Minister Dayalson was there. I was proud of them and how they conducted themselves and the nuance of which they utilized messaging and were proactive in their approach, but they didn't close the borders yet. They were trying to warn people, hey, be careful. If you don't have to travel now, please don't travel, right? And then eventually they escalated, don't travel now, right? Those who are looking to travel now, don't travel now. But at the time, I was there when they were starting to just advise people, hey, let's be safer. Don't risk it. And I was proud. And that's why when I saw what it became during the election, let's just say disappointment is an understatement. It was like Jekyll and Hyde. Not everybody will agree that there was a Jekyll, but to me there was a Jekyll. It wasn't all Hyde. But in some ways that's worse. Because you deny us of what you could have been, of what you put yourself as and promised to be, of what you could be still. With the current nonsense of how you conduct yourself, you deny us that. And occupy a seat with this current version that at the end of the day, dare I say, for those of us who saw the good things, now could only lament that it's disappointing. Keith Rowley had his moments. Kamala Persad-Bissessar has had her pitfalls, but we're willing to say, okay, round two. But just because I say I'm willing now to see, can things be better? I am not a prisoner to that, where it must be better, otherwise I was wrong for giving her a chance and I don't want to look stupid. No. And then you break it down further. Somebody in her government might do something bad. Doesn't necessarily mean she is wrong. Flat out. Meritocracy is a hell of a thing, but in a strange way, how we treat our criticism of our public officials is not too dissimilar to how we deal with HR practices in the public service. It's all based on tenure. Well, because I supported them from day one, I had to keep supporting them. Not because of the merits of what they say when it's good or the unfortunate things of what they say when it's bad, and we judge them on a meritocracy. But we pick a side and we stick to a side because loyalty above all else, and that is part of the problem with both administrations, depending on how you see it and if you know what to look for and what you prioritize. All right. Let me just double check that we don't have another comment. Yes, we do. We close with this comment. We cannot settle for a little unemployment is good. This is where most problems start. There are loopholes that can be plugged. Yes, I agree with this. We cannot settle for a little unemployment is good. Because there's trickle-down effects to this. Because there's also the, what about everybody wins? To borrow a campaign slogan that was very not catchy, but the sentiment was not necessarily incorrect. We're stronger together. But are we really together? For all of the negative things people see in the world, and then they want to say, no, Sean, you're not seeing this or you're not seeing that. It's not that I don't see it. It's that I acknowledge that there's two sides to every story. And the problem is most people want to think, oh, but there's a good side and a bad side. And I'm saying no. In most cases in this world, they're both bad sides because we do a poor, lazy job to promote the right thing. That's why when people say two sides of the same coin, there's merit in that. More to say, no more time to say it. Sean Michael Small, this is talking about the WSND Content Capital. I want to remind you people to have a good day. Stay safe out there. Be mindful of the weather and what it might mean to the traffic patterns depending on, your commute. It's nice to be nice on your road. Although you have to be careful when you're trying to be nice for the pedestrians and you suddenly stop and then you cause a line of traffic behind you to suddenly stop, and hopefully other people don't hit each other and then you just go on your merry way even though you may have been the cause or not. Just say it. No one expects someone to suddenly stop around Savannah. But remember your allegiance to the Republic and each other. We'll see each other tomorrow with the good lady. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.